In this class, I've learned a significant amount about how gender norms are represented in today's society, and I found that a lot of the sources that we viewed in class were thoughtful and provoking. So, it's me and my mother, Miss Birch, and today we're going to discuss the harms of a patriarchal society and how it enforces gender norms and roles. So, firstly, I'd like to just discuss the controversy surrounding a patriarchal society. Some people believe the societal structure of a patriarchy is good because they believe that they should live with that lifestyle pertaining to male and female conforming norms. And throughout the semester, I've learned a lot about the harms of gender conformity to norms and them being enforced in society. And with this knowledge, I've come to believe that the patriarchy and its values are a leading cause in shaping the norms of gender in our society today. So firstly, I'd like to just discuss some simple definitions. What is a patriarchy? Well, a patriarchy is defined as a form of social organization where cultural and institutional beliefs are dominated by men. And some great examples of patriarchal societies were America and ancient Greece. And then lastly, I'd just like to ask, Mom, do you have anything that you would like to add that pertains to this topic?
I'm just looking forward to this discussion that we'll have. Interested to hear some of the research that you've done. Definitely am familiar with societal stereotypes and those types of things, especially in the kind of culture and area of the country that I grew up in. I know that it was very understood, that very traditional type of homes and the way that children were raised, and relationships and those roles in the home and those types of things were, I came from a very traditional type of culture. And so I've definitely seen lots of different perspectives throughout my life. And so I'm interested in kind of hearing some of the research that you have and enjoying this discussion together.
And one more question. I don't know if she knows, where were you born and raised, Mom?
I was born and raised in Indiana.
So now I'd like to discuss some of the sources with you, Mom. The first source I'm going to be discussing is Megan Moss's source, and this source is titled How Toys Became Gendered. In this article, Megan Moss uses various statistics and studies to show how toys became gendered in today's society. She discusses why they stay that way and what society is doing now to address gender conformity. Moss discusses what groups influence change and what they do in hopes of reducing gender conformity regarding gender norms, starting with the toy market. This article mainly involves the toy market and how they shape gender norms and what they are doing to fix it. We can see how Moss's use of different sources aids to her credibility as she discusses studies that she has both observed and conducted. Her exploration of gender through conformity and norms contributes to her main point about gender conformity and the overall point that all these articles share about the expectations society places on gender performance and norms. So, this second source is a visual presentation conducted by the Professor of Communications at University of Massachusetts, Sut Jolly. It's titled A Woman's Beauty, and in this, Sut Jolly discusses how a Latin America society and its art and literature, how it influenced the confirmation of gender norms in American society today. Jolly explores the standard conventions of each gender, such as how they are perceived in media by being portrayed in conforming positions for females and dominating positions for males. Jolly goes on to address how the marketing and modeling industries deliberately choose to market conformity to the standard gender norms. Jolly uses many different photos or visuals to showcase his points. A lot of photos from American modeling industries, specifically ones like Guess, that showcase females in subordinate positions.
Are you talking about like the brand Guess?
Yes, the brand Guess. And this article can be used to build upon the idea that gender conformity is unnatural or unhealthy. And a lot of the articles that I've already discussed and will continue to discuss share this idea. So this source is one of the first sources that we talked about in class, and it's titled A Woman's Beauty, Put Down Her Power Source, and it was written by a very popular feminist named Susan Sontag. In this article, she explores the normal conventions of womanhood in society. She explores how society values the outer beauty of a woman, such as her beauty and ability to care for her family, over what's truly inside a person. She goes on to explore how certain cultures crafted the differences between handsomeness and beauty, as well as the norms of gender. We can see how Sontag uses different examples of women in culture, and then appeals to logic to her point about society's adherence to superficial qualities in women. Sontag's text, just like many of the other texts we're about to discuss, aids to the point about gender confirmation in society. So this source might surprise you. It's actually The Little Mermaid.
Oh.
So as we know, The Little Mermaid tells the story of a young, naive mermaid who falls in love with a prince. And in doing so, she must make a deal with a sea witch to try and gain his love. But what's important about this film is perfect for exploring how gender norms shape society, because characters like Ariel, her father, and the prince all exhibit different aspects of gender norms and conformity. This movie can be used similarly to the other sources in showing how gender conformity is able to pressure women and men into acting in accordance with them. The film also explores the idealization of wants over self-worth. So I'll be discussing the last source that I'm using from class. It's called The Body and the Reproduction of Femininity. It's written by Susan Bordeaux. She was a well-renowned feminist, and in this article, she discusses how a woman's body is viewed in society and how these views should be altered. Bordeaux provides, out of all the articles, the most in-depth view on masculinity and femininity and how they are kept in place in today's society. Bordeaux's text can be used to understand the sensibilities and conventions of gender, as well as how they came to exist. Bordeaux addresses her audience with as much knowledge as possible, offering vast amounts of information and analysis that can be used to further aid the other sources and points of gender norms in society. Basically, I know I showed you this source a little bit, but Susan Bordeaux used grammar and vocabulary that is almost Shakespearean. It is very hard to understand, and it almost aids to her point about women being smart and going against typical gender norms. So yeah. And then now I'd like to discuss two personal sources that I found that were very relevant to my thesis statement in terms of crafting it and also gathering more information. Firstly, The Feminist in Cell Block Y. This was published by CNN, and it follows a prison inmate named Ricky Rosetta as he urges his peers to reform their ways. Rosetta focuses on the patriarchy in today's society and how its views and values are presented in society today. Rosetta delves deep into the causes of manly issues like toxic masculinity, being afraid to show weakness or cry, and being kind, among many other things. This article was the main point for me forming this project. So I'm also going to be talking about this blog post written by Women Against Feminism, and it's called Why We Need to Fight for the Patriarchy. Basically, this article and the whole website is run by a group of women on Facebook and Instagram that all believe that feminism is wrong or they don't stand up for their values. I think the most important part of this article, since I used it for my counter argument in relation to the whole presentation, is the fact that she talks a lot about how other societies that value a patriarchy, how they were successful, and how a patriarchy fosters success. And she goes on to use a lot of examples from current history today and ancient history to aid her point about why she urges women to fight for the patriarchy.
Interesting.
So now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of the assignment. We are going to be discussing our claims and our evidences. So for the first body paragraph, or I guess body discussion, we're going to be talking about how the patriarchy's values impose itself upon men that are impressionable, insecure, or simply don't know any better.
Sure.
So I have two sources that I have already discussed, but I would like to delve a little bit further into, and then we'll have a discussion about it. So, A Feminist in Cell Block Y. Again, this article was the reason I chose this topic because it gave me a new perspective on what forms gender norms. And then also Susan Bordeaux's article, how it discusses the conventions of being a woman in today's society. So, in the documentary Feminist in Cell Block Y, Ricky Rosetta writes on construction paper in prison. And on these pieces of construction paper, he's breaking down the methods that the patriarchy uses to instill upon men in society, and also the types of norms that are expressed by the patriarchy, such as toxic masculinity, male toughness, being the breadwinner in society as a male, and also it largely addresses gender conformity for females and also gender conformity for males. Them feeling like they have to be a big, strong man in the family can lead to a lot of trauma and questions that can also lead to dangerous results because they didn't understand how society works, and that's the fault of the patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And I think another source that aids to A Feminist in Cell Block Y is Susan Bordeaux's source, because she explains how the superficial qualities of women are pushed in newspapers and young adult magazines, which again present an unhealthy view for men. I like to specifically focus on young adult magazines because when Bordeaux says that, it aids to the point about the patriarchy imposing itself upon men that are impressionable, insecure, or simply don't know any better. And I don't know any three adjectives to describe those words better than a teenager in today's society. Mm-hmm. I think, with so many different sources of information coming in, it's impossible as a parent to just teach your child. You have TikTok teaching your child, you have video games teaching your child, you have movies teaching your child. And what is the source of these teachings? It is the patriarchy. They are all being pushed by American society today and values that the patriarchy instills. So, in my second body paragraph, I'm going to be discussing the patriarchal views in America and how they can be derived from earlier periods in Latin America and other countries. The two texts I'm going to be using for this claim is Sut Jolly's visual presentation and Susan Sontag's text. In Sontag's text, she discusses how the early Latin countries and European countries, specifically Christian, how they shaped the perspective of beauty and handsomeness. And Sut Jolly also discusses how a lot of countries, specifically Latin American countries, use their, well, ancient Latin American countries, how they use their text and their photography slash artistry, how that is reflected on today by American modeling industries, those like Guess. So Jolly goes on to say that many of the popular photographers and models using paintings and other forms of art from Europe as their inspiration. We see this a lot today in American society, where a lot of what we have today in our culture is derived from other cultures, but specifically the modeling industry is derived a lot from ancient Latin American cultures. And these artist pieces just so happen to be riddled with gender conforming characters and themes, which are now expressed in today's society. And also, I think this Sontag quote perfectly personifies how beauty and like the ideals of beauty and handsomeness, how they were created in society. She says, in French and Italian societies suggest that Catholic countries, unlike those countries shaped by the Protestant version of Christianity, still retain some vestiges of the pagan admiration for beauty. But the difference, if one exists, is of degree only. In every modern country that is Christian or post-Christian, women are the beautiful sex, to the detriment of the notion of beauty as well as women. The detriment of the notion of beauty as well as women. And I think that is perfectly represented in the photography and imagery that Sut Jolly produces to aid to my claim of the point that the patriarchal views in America can be derived from earlier periods in Latin America and other countries. And so, for my final body paragraph, my claim is the patriarchy's norms are expressed and upheld by the American markets. So, the two sources I'm going to be using for this are The Little Mermaid and Megan Moss's source. As we know, Megan Moss's source discussed how toys represent gender norms in society today. And The Little Mermaid, again, as we discussed earlier, how it projects, it potentially projects views of anti-feminist rhetoric to its younger audiences. Sure. So, I think some great evidence to my point is this quote by Megan Moss, and it says, in a 2017 study showed that more than 3/4 of those surveyed said it was a good thing for parents to encourage young girls to play with toys or to do activities associated with the opposite gender. The share rises to 80% and for women and millennials, but what's important is that when it came to boys, support dropped significantly with 64% overall, and far fewer men saying it was good to encourage them to do things associated with girls. This discusses how in society, American men don't want to teach their children to play with Barbie dolls, to play with toys that...
Like, don't want to teach their sons.
Yeah, that toys that are neutrally gender conforming, that are able to be used by both genders, because a lot of men don't want to raise their children not to be manly, right? And then also in The Little Mermaid, it really projects a view of like women not being strong in society, because you have strong male characters like Prince Eric and King Triton that are so prominent in the film and have so much dialogue and have so much presence in the film. It kind of outshines small little Ariel. And then the only other female lead that you have in that film is Ursula, who is an evil sea witch. So I think, you know, both these points kind of aid to the fact that the American market has a hand in what it wants your children to believe. Both with how Megan Moss said about, you know, the men and what toys they want to raise their children with, and then also, you know, what movies we are showing our children.
Sure.
All right, now moving on to our counter-argument discussion. We already discussed it already, women against feminism, why we need to fight for the patriarchy. Again, as I told you, this article was written by a somewhat anonymous person. She's not an official writer, but she still expresses the fact that she believes the patriarchy should be fought for. In this article, Jenna adds to her claim that the patriarchy should be upheld by listing multiple countries and cultures that have had great success in their patriarchal societies and discusses faults of the matriarchy. A lot of these countries were American, North American countries, European countries, but I think what's important to this and like aids in my counter argument is I'm not pushing, and we haven't been pushing for a matriarchy. And I think a lot of the sources that we have don't push for a matriarchy. We push for a gender-neutral society, and I think that's what America is going to today. So she really bashed the matriarchy and could not see herself living in a society that is neutral. So I think that kind of aids to like my counter argument in saying that she's unable to see herself in a position where neither gender is above one another. And I think that's really sad because it's not a race of the sexes, it's equality of the sexes.
Sure. That's a really great point. I think it's really important to note that when you have full on feminism or full on patriarchal views, that it levels the playing field to the point, in my opinion, that it doesn't celebrate differences in one another. It just puts everybody on this equal playing field, and there are strengths and weaknesses on both sides. Let's admit it. There, everybody has weaknesses and everybody has strengths. And I think that in a society that pushes to the extremes, it doesn't allow us to really celebrate one another and have that mutual respect for one another's differences so that we can work better together as a society.
100%. I think with that, we're just going to jump straight into the conclusion. Restating my thesis, I have come to believe that the patriarchy and its values are a leading cause in shaping the norms of gender in our society today. The patriarchy's value imposes itself upon men that are impressionable, insecure, or simply aren't taught any better. The patriarchal views in America can be derived from earlier periods in Latin America, and the patriarchy's norms are expressed and upheld by the American markets. All three of those claims were discussed, and we talked about evidence to support these claims. And I just think this issue is significant because we should be pushing for a society that enables our children to live in peace and equality. And I agree that we should be able to acknowledge aspects of both genders and how they aid one another, but it definitely doesn't help us if we have a society that is strictly patriarchal or strictly matriarchal. I think a great point in time that has the significance of this is when I watched Sut Jolly's documentary. I felt a little bit disgusted, like my eyes were very locked onto the screen. The room was dark, my hands attached to the table. I don't know if I was smelling much of anything, but I was so locked in on his ideas about gender confirmation and how earlier societies' paintings and artwork was used in creating what we have today. And it really blew me away. That whole lecture that he presented online was just really eye-opening because it showed how much we derived not only our gender confirmation, but just everything from other cultures and how much of a blending pot American society really is. And on that note, Ms. Birch, I'd like to thank you for watching our visual presentation / discussion.
Thank you.